Okay, welcome everyone. I am so glad you're here. Good afternoon. I'm just excited to dig into this important conversation with our newly appointed Chicago Public Schools CEO. My name is Liz Dozier, and I am the founder and the CEO of Chicago Beyond. And we're an impact investor, and we're designed to support ideas, individuals, and organizations working to ensure that young people have an opportunity to live a full and a free life. As a former Chicago Public Schools principal, the young people just hold an incredible place in my heart. It's really where, during the principalship, where I learned some of the greatest lessons of my life. And honestly, where the foundation of Chicago Beyond was really born. Our values, how we do work, how we show up in the work, and how we show up in community. It's where I understood and really realized how equity had to be at the center of everything that we did. And we had to, at the school, meet our students where they were. And there was no one size fits all approach. It was about really providing our students with the tools that they needed to survive. And so today at Chicago Beyond, we carry that same approach with how we invest, with how we partner with organizations as we drive towards systemic change, just like Chicago Public Schools. And so last year, we were proud to partner with Chicago Public Schools and really launch the Healing Centered Framework. And because we are invested in the well-being of every child in Chicago, that's why we wanted to host this conversation today. As many of you know, Chicago Public Schools is home to over 300,000 students annually. And over the past 2 years, like many school districts and many schools across the country, our students have faced incredibly intense moments. And given all the things that are happening around our students and in their ecosystem, we, along with many of you watching and across the country, have really been thinking about how do we ensure that there are equitable opportunities for each and every single student, no matter where they are, to thrive. And one area is by investing in healing, which is why Chicago Beyond partnered so closely with Chicago Public Schools on that important initiative. But we know, as there always is, there's so much more work to do. So today I am absolutely honored to welcome Chicago Public CEO Pedro Martinez and the Interim Chief Education Officer, Dr. Maurice Swinney, who will be in conversation together to discuss matters of equity for Chicago students. And as many know, it's the first day back in class for Chicago students, which makes this conversation on equity incredibly timely and also critical. So this is a point of housekeeping. The two of them will be in conversation, and towards the end of that conversation, I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to jump in with questions that you guys sent in, you sent in from when you registered. So you can feel free to also submit your new questions into the chat, and we're going to try to get to as many of those as possible. So right now, just welcome Maurice and Pedro. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much, and to you and to the entire Chicago Beyond family for hosting this event today and allowing Pedro and I, CEO Martinez, to speak about equity. And also, Liz, special thanks to you for being a Children's First Fund board member here in CPS. We are both grateful to have this partnership with Chicago Beyond, who has been and continues to be fully invested in the success of our young people, not only as students, but also as future leaders in our city. And it's also great to have Liz, who was, we first met when she was the principal at Fenger High School and I was at Tilden, and has been, there's so many wonderful stories that we can tell at some point that I think are worth hearing about. Like, how do we ensure that those who are farthest from opportunity get what they need? For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Maurice Swinney, Chief Equity Officer / Interim Chief Education Officer here in CPS. And I've been in Chicago Public Schools for about 10 years. And what you'll learn more about Pedro, he was also here right before I got here. So you'll learn more about our CEO and the things that he's bringing to the table. We created the CPS equity framework to really give some guidance and structure and support around, like, how do you advance equity within the school system? And that framework, when it was launched in November 2019 as a draft, we were in the middle of a lot happening within the system. And then right behind that, here came the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we know that this crisis around equity, around advancing equity, is sort of one we have to really, really be more critical about, and making sure that we do the right accelerated things to ensure that those young people across the city are getting what they need. And I'm very excited to welcome our CEO. So before he introduces himself, what's interesting is he has returned to Chicago, and he has a lot of Chicago roots as a graduate of Juarez High School, where many of you, if you've seen the announcement, where he was named CEO. So it's a very exciting time for us. But I want to start with just saying, Pedro, I think I was trying to count the number of days, and I think it's now been 105 days. You just met your 100-day mark, and there's been a lot going on. But let's first start, before we talk about CEO, like, who is Pedro? Give us your background. I know it, but give folks your background and let them know who you are as a human, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. Well, thank you, Maurice. So first of all, grew up in Chicago, very proud of my city. I always say this is the most beautiful city. I've gotten a chance to travel both for career and personal. And I'll tell you, I've never found a more beautiful city than the city of Chicago. My parents brought me here from Mexico in the 70s, early 70s, came here as I was turning 6. Wound up moving into the Lower West Side, went to Walsh Elementary School, and then went to, at that time, Cooper Junior High. We used to call it Big Cooper. And then I graduated from Benito Juarez in the 80s. And, for me, I am the oldest of 12 siblings, 10 of us still alive, all CPS students. Some already have graduated from CPS. In fact, I have 3 sisters that are teachers at CPS, from kindergarten to middle school to high school. But all my siblings, actually all of my siblings have either finished or are finishing college, all CPS graduates. And then I have 30 between counting my children and all of my nephews and nieces, 30 nephews and nieces, and my 2 children that are either have gone through CPS or are going through CPS or will go to CPS, because there's a couple still babies in the family. And for me, I grew up in poverty. I grew up in a time when there was a lot of violence in the Lower West Side, a lot of gang activity. And my father worked 2 jobs, never made more than $7 an hour. I used to do his income taxes, and I still think about this. He never made more than $13,000 a year. And I remember that we would wait for the earned income credit, when that first got introduced. And that was when we would get close. We would, right around. So that's why I would fill out his taxes. My father would wait for that. My mom would put clothes on layaway. And then that's how we'd get, our clothing every year. And it was a struggle. It was just a struggle. 2-bedroom apartment. I think about our families now, especially when districts across the country were remote. And I just imagine myself being in a 2-bedroom apartment with so many siblings, so many, just a lot of noise. I know I would be the child that didn't have internet access, that didn't have a device, and so I grew up that way, and that has really humbled me. Went to U of I Champaign-Urbana, graduated with a business degree, never thought I would end up in education, and wound up, working for PricewaterhouseCoopers and Deloitte & Touche, and then eventually went to the Archdiocese of Chicago, where I was there for almost 8 years. And then Arnie Duncan had just become the CEO of Chicago and was recruiting a turnaround team. And we met. I joined CPS. I was the budget director, chief financial officer. And then during that time, mentors like Dr. Barbara Easton Watkins mentored me and said, Pedro, you really need to be a superintendent. And so I transitioned over to education. In fact, I got my certification as a superintendent, and then actually ended before I left Chicago. I was managing a group of schools on the West Side, and it was exciting because I was supervising principals. And then I got a chance to go to Nevada, including Clark County, which is the next largest district after us, actually the 5th largest district in the country, with over 300,000 students. And I was the number 2 person. I was the deputy superintendent, similar to the CETO role here. And there I got a chance to just go deep into curriculum, into instruction, supervising principals. And then really for the last 10 years, I've been a superintendent in Northern Nevada, and then most recently in San Antonio, where I was their superintendent for more than almost 7 years. I had been their longest term superintendent in probably 3 decades. And then got a chance to come back to Chicago. And for me, it is just exciting because not only am I back home, but being here the first time, I got a chance to see what the district was like then. And of course, I went through it as a student. And then to come back now, like I said, it just couldn't be more exciting for me.
Nice, nice. And you know, it was all just like Janice, right? You all were both homegrown in the city, and so you have a lot of understanding about the city as well as the system. And so, you know, during your first, I'm gonna just talk from like your 100 days. We visit a lot of schools together. You visit a lot of schools with a lot of people. You've sat with CTU, you've sat with faith-based organizations, the CAC members. I mean, there was a lot of like speaking and listening and talking and really understanding what people are asking for within the school system. And so I know parts of what you are building out as a part of advancing the vision here, but maybe give us or give those folks who are listening a little bit of insight on, you know, what is your future vision for the district and the impact that it can have on the city of Chicago?
Well, and I think first of all, you know, and Maurice, you know, you've been part of it, right? I mean, let's give credit to the team here in CPS. I mean, when I left the Chicago Public Schools back in 2009, our graduation rate was just above 50%. You know, it was just getting there, and we had improved it. By the way, we had improved it, but significant challenges still academically. There was, you know, there were systems that were put in place at that time. And you know, one of the great things I was able to do in my first, you know, in the first 3 months was announcing our graduation rates for last year. And even during the pandemic, we had a record graduation rate for a 5-year rate, and even our 4-year rate was over 80%. And that's a big deal because not a lot of districts our size have those kind of graduation rates. And then of course we have one of the highest college going rates in the country at scale. And I always say this, you know, what I love is that it's our neighborhood high schools that are driving many of those gains. You know, our selective enrollment schools, they're always wonderful, right? Whitney Young was always around, you know, when I was, you know, Lane Tech, you know, they've always been around since I was a kid. And of course, you know, I was here when we, you know, opened up, you know, Walter Payton and Northside Prep and all the other, and Lim Bloom and all the other selective enrollment schools. But the neighborhood schools are the ones that have gotten so much stronger. So you know, our vision right now is, first of all, we know how to do great programming. Let's make that really clear. We know what good programming looks like. What I've seen though is that it's not consistent across all the neighborhoods. We don't have enough access across it. You know, and Maurice, you know, you're passionate about equity. We need to have this conversation about what equity means in the city of Chicago. What does it mean? What is the quality of education that every child needs to receive, that every child deserves to get? What are the learning spaces that every child deserves? What are the extracurriculars and the fine arts? All the access to this great programming. So the vision is creating a neighborhood plan where we do a real assessment, where we engage our parents, we engage our community stakeholders. Because by the way, you know, they've lived in our communities, right? They know, they've seen it all. And I think it's, you know, we need to listen to them, build a plan together so that, for example, if we need to enhance certain academic offerings, we make sure we do that, and we do it across each neighborhood. And then the big conversation that I really want to have is, how do we make sure we build a sustainable plan for the quality learning spaces and working spaces that our children and staff deserve? I'll tell you, one of my biggest frustrations as I visit schools, first of all, I love, you know, interacting with the children. Maurice, you see me.
Yeah,
you know,
yes.
I am at home with our kids. You know, I don't care if it's the South Side or the West Side or the Lower West Side where I'm from. I mean, I'm with them. But, you know, when I look at our facilities, I see magic that teachers are doing in their classrooms, but it's not reflected in our physical spaces. And so that is something that I think we need to have a heart-to-heart conversation about how to change that, how to create a sustainable plan for that.
Yeah, I'm glad, because I wanted to bring that up. That has been something that I think you've said a lot, is around what does the learning environment look like, and how do we not have young people in learning conditions that are not equal, and what does it take? What might it take as a change in law, a change in practice, a change in finance to really get those learning environments more welcoming than they ever have before? And I think that is something that, let me tell you, you have a lot of families ready to discuss what that would look like and how do we continue to do that. You spoke a little bit about graduation rates, and you and I have talked a lot about opportunity gaps for students of color, and we do see them decreasing year after year. But we do know for Black and Latinx males, we still have the lowest graduation rates. And so, you know, we've been exploring that together, and just talk a little bit about, like, how can we continue to reduce that gap, not from a deficit mindset, but like, how do we really do the right things to accelerate those opportunities for Black and brown males?
Maurice, you hit it, first of all, a really important point. How do we approach this work? Looking at what all the gifts that our children bring to the table. In my former district in San Antonio, 97% of our children were children of color, 90% of poverty. In my last 3 years there before COVID, we had the largest achievement gains of any district in the state of Texas. We closed the gaps in college going rates. We closed the gap in college readiness across, and frankly, what it really was really doing that, taking a look at, changing really the conversation about the gifts that our children are bringing. And so one of the things we really have to look at is, first of all, is access. Do we have access to the high quality programming across every one of our neighborhoods, especially in our neighborhoods where we have the highest poverty rates, which tend to be also our neighborhoods where our children of color are? And how do we make sure that access exists so that they don't have to leave their neighborhood? They don't have to, be trying to get into one of our selective enrollment schools to get access to that programming, including, by the way, extracurriculars. One of the things that I did in my former district, we invested heavily in the fine arts. We invested heavily in ROTC and athletic programs. And I'll tell you, to bring the pride of our children, because when a child lives in poverty, you always start behind academically. Why? Because, for example, my parents had a second grade education. They didn't know what they didn't know. And so my vocabulary wasn't as strong as if I would have grown up in a middle class family, right? I wouldn't have the same access and exposure that I would have had in a middle class family. So for us, that's always the challenge. But I'll tell you, when we bring access to our families, to our children, to that programming, their pride comes out. Their pride. And I'll tell you, the arts, extracurriculars, those programs do that. And then getting them access to high quality programming, like Absolutely. International Baccalaureate programs, advanced placement courses, college dual credit classes. So, I can go on and on, but that to me is a big key.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, in conversation with some teachers and principals, I remember some of them saying, like, the way we approach social emotional learning can't just be get a therapist or a counselor, but like, how do we create spaces and ways for young people to use their talents and gifts to do some self-healing is what I kind of interpret that they said, which makes a lot of sense. And you also, I know there's a lot of work that we've done with Becoming a Man and working on womanhood and Gear Up. And there are a lot of programs and opportunities here within the city. And I know we have some things. I'm gonna try not to leak some parts of your vision that I know people are going to really sort of grab hold to. But before you joined CPS, like, we had worked with Chicago Beyond to launch the Healing Center framework to really, really put some structure around, like, what does it mean to be a trauma-informed, trauma-responsive organization, and how do we put the right supports in schools for teachers and most definitely our students. What do you think is, what is your approach to supporting healing within CPS for both students and staff?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Maurice, especially during this time, right, as we're all struggling through this pandemic. So I think, first of all, we gotta have, first of all, the training for our teachers, for them to be able to identify trauma, for them to be able to identify when children are struggling. Let's really talk about this. We saw more suicides during this pandemic than ever before. We saw more mental health challenges for our children more than ever before. And so, of course, we need to also invest, and this is where partners are key, because we can't do this by ourselves. We need our social service agencies to be with us, our mental health experts to be with us, so that we can provide direct service to families. Because I'll tell you, one of the biggest challenges in our community is we don't like to talk about mental health. We don't like to talk about the challenges that our children are going through. And it's fascinating, right? Because in other cultures, or especially in middle-class families, they get access to those services, right? They get access. And so one of the things I think we have to do is to make sure that we are providing that kind of access, but also to help our teachers identify it, talk it over with their children. Social and emotional well-being has to be integrated in our core instruction. It cannot be something on the side. And frankly, it's our way for our children to be able to express themselves, to be able to feel that they can really just feel comfortable. I remember going to one of our high schools, and I'll never forget this. Our high school students said, we have a mental health clinic here in our high school. And yeah, I still have a hard time, especially with my friends talking about mental health, but knowing that service exists just makes me feel better. knowing that I have a teacher, and I asked this to the students, all of them could identify at least one adult in the building that they could go talk to, about, how they were feeling, about challenges they were having, maybe trauma that they had been exposed to during, when we were remote. And so I think all those elements are necessary. But again, the biggest thing I would love our community here, one, we need more help. We cannot do this by ourselves. We need social service agencies and mental health experts to join us. And then we had to figure out how to help our community be able to be more comfortable with these issues.
Yeah, I think I appreciate that. And I know, you're helping us to streamline processes to make it easier for community-based organizations to access the district and be a part of that work, which I think is very, very helpful. And at the same time, you said something on a call with a group of leaders just the other day where you said, and we still can't lose sight of academic progress or learning. And a part of that was like, we need to make sure that when young people, we're responsible for educating them. I know there's a lot of talk about, accelerated learning, unfinished learning, learning loss. And, I don't want to get into the semantics around the term, but what do you think as a district, what are some of our next steps in terms of how do we accelerate learning for young people within our schools so that we can keep up with the graduation rate that you mentioned where we're over 80% and beyond?
So I think, Maurice, number one, we're very blessed to have just an amazing team of principals and teachers and paraprofessionals, and of course, supported by our central office team, that first of all, there's a high level of capacity. There's a lot of stress right now. And so we need to acknowledge that stress, and we need to, and continue to work to figure out how do we get through this pandemic? How do we learn to live with it, frankly, because it's going to be with us for a while. And then really starting to look at, again, what are the big gaps that we're seeing? So for example, we know from data that we saw some drops in proficiency rates across our achievement scores. We also know that math and science nationwide really took a step back while children were remote. And so how do we provide those supports for children where we customize them, a personalized plan? How do we create a personalized plan for every student so that we know some students, and by the way, we've heard this from our teachers, some students, as soon as they came back from remote, it was like a trampoline. You saw amazing academic gains that were very quickly, right? Because, the children had not done well in remote. We have other students where the gaps were already wide before the pandemic, and we got to continue to add additional supports. And I'll tell you, there's no shortcuts. It is high quality programming. It is making sure we support our teachers with core instruction, and then additional time, right? How do we make sure, and how do we leverage those three things, so that again we create a personal plan for each child. And of course, what I love is that when you look at our schools, I can show you evidence of high quality programming across our district. So it's really, how do we learn even from ourselves, right? Take some of those best practices and make sure that we make them systemic across the district. And then I know, Maurice, you would always say this, right? Always with an eye of equity, always with an eye to make sure that our children who are struggling the most have the most access.
Yes, and let me say that the part about us learning from each other is one of the critical pieces. And I won't highlight the schools that I hear you highlight often that I think are across anywhere from neighborhood to selective enrollment, where we've seen great things in classrooms. And I'm excited about what we are sort of teasing out right now behind the scenes about how do we learn from each other to continue that learning culture within the district. So let me ask one final question, because I think we're coming up on time, and Liz is really good about time in terms of asking some other questions. But there are a lot of people who want to participate in supporting the district, and I know we have our Children's First Fund, and which is more accessible probably to philanthropic partners. And I know Executive Director Sadie Jefferson is working on some things. But what would you say to the average person or the family member who is passionate about public education? What are some things that other folks can do that may not be dependent on the system or may be dependent on the system?
Yeah, I would say, Maurice, first of all, number one, we have amazing schools across our entire city. Get involved with your school, partner with the school, and especially as we manage through this pandemic, right? Whether it's volunteer services, whether if you have a small business, our schools are amazing. I'll tell you, and I always say this to our community, you will fall in love with our children. you will fall in love with them, because these are children that, again, they have a great work ethic. They just want opportunity. And so number one, get involved with our schools. As you said, Maurice, we have an amazing foundation that has set up programs to help our families, especially as they're struggling. For example, our Compassion Fund, we have a lot of families. This pandemic has been so uneven. And so please, if you have the means, please support our foundation so that those resources go directly to our families. And of course, continue to be, critical friends for us. One of the things, Maurice, you and I we're always open to feedback, right? We're always open to understanding where we can improve. And our commitment is that we'll listen and we will continue to work on challenges. We're a large district. I've seen big improvements, but I also can see areas that we need to make some improvements as well.
Yeah, I know you say this phrase, like you say, okay, this is what I believe, but I'm coachable. Like you're always open to wrestling with ideas. And I think all of us appreciate that, that sort of wrestling with ideas. Tell me, so now you are, you're back home, your family's here, your students are in a CPS school, your children are students in a CPS school. Tell me, like, what has been one of the joys that you have had as a father, learning about Chicago Public Schools outside of being the leader of Chicago Public Schools?
Well, what I love is, I'll tell you, so when I got here, the one non-negotiable my wife had was that our children had to be in a dual language school. Mm-hmm. And so I asked for just neighborhood schools that had a space in 2nd and 5th grade, because my son is 11, my daughter is 7 in 2nd grade. And so, we had a small list of schools. And so my wife got to, visit a couple of them. And I'll tell you, they love their neighborhood school. They love it. I mean, they did very well. And, and for me, it's just, again, the recognition that we have high quality schools. And so seeing their grades, and they were both very proud. And so, and we moved mid-year. It's not easy to move from a different state, even though, my family's here in Chicago, my children were looking forward to moving to Chicago. But for me, as a father, I just love being in this role and watching the district through their eyes. And so when I hear about, how they love their teachers, how they love, what their school does. And so for me, what I want is I want all of our children to feel like that, all of our students in CPS. And I know, Maurice, you want the same thing as well. You remember as a principal how much passion you had for your students. And so that's what we want. And that's what I look forward to really making sure that we really work and we don't stop working until that exists for every child in CPS.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I look forward to more and more conversations with communities about academic program. And I think that is probably one of the things that you have been adamant about of no matter what school a student attends, they are deserving. And that is the biggest sort of equity issue. And you also talk a lot about literacy, but that's for another day. But I think that's one of the areas that we got to make sure that when young people are in their schools, they have what they need. And that includes the academic program and also what you described around the arts and other things. So with that, I want to take a moment and pivot to Liz. I can go on, Liz. I have the questions. I have a whole bunch of other things that I want to dig deeper into that I think we can keep talking about at some point.
All good. Thank you so much just to both of you for being here. Excited to now jump into some just incredible questions that we had come through from residents and parents and just folks across our city. I'm going to kind of be all over the place with these. I want to hit as many of them as humanly possible in this next 25 minutes or so. So the first is just the acknowledgement, obviously, that we are now back to class for Chicago students. And we know that there are still some things that are being finalized between the district and the teachers union. But as both of you think about this moment, particularly for our young people, for our city, what did you learn that you're going to be carrying forward as you think about us?
Go ahead, Maurice, you start off.
I think for me, I have to hold space for optimism and good intention. That even though sometimes large institutions and groups, it can be somewhat polarizing, we have to hold space for optimism and good intention and wrestle with those ideas. And we have to make sure that, I think the one thing I've also learned is that I wish we would have done more listening to young people throughout the process. And that is something, I talk with other equity officers around the country all the time. And we're always talking about like focus groups, or what are the ways in which we capture young people's voice so that they have their voices centered in the conversation, that can help us all as adults do better at figuring out how do we do this in their best interest. I think I'm holding that sort of optimism around elevating the voice of young people.
Yeah, and for me to build on that, it really is, how do we get more parents to the table? I think for me, what was, we could have our differences with our different stakeholders, and that's okay. So we welcome, constructive criticism. We always have, places to improve on. But I think what really hurt me the most was just the fact that, parents were held hostage in the middle and never felt like they really had a voice. And so that's something that I'm really taking to heart. I've only been here 3 months, but I still feel that we need to find ways for parents to feel that they're part of the conversation, because frankly, these are their children, right? They should have a say-so in how they're feeling. With over 100,000 children being vaccinated, you have, one area, one set of parents that, feel a certain way, another set of parents, frankly, that are very anxious and for different reasons still have a lot of questions about vaccines and about, COVID in general. And so, I think as we have to be the ones that bring people together, and to Maurice's point, have a sense of optimism about how do we move forward. And I, I'm just, like I said, I just felt so sad for so many of our families that were sort of caught in the middle.
Thank you both for that. As you think about moving forward, one of the questions that came through was really about trauma and about the social emotional challenges that not just students face, but that teachers are facing, what teachers are actually seeing in their classrooms every single day. And so, the idea is that obviously teachers and adults and kids have a lot happening in the course of normal business, but we're in the midst of COVID. So as you think about this, what is the district can do? Like, how do we actually support our students? How do we support our teachers, especially those most impacted by trauma?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Pedro, you want to?
Oh, you go ahead, Maurice.
Okay. I think there are a couple of things. One, we do have a lot of teachers within the district who are exceptional, teachers and principals, who are exceptional at supporting young people. And to Pedro's point earlier, like, how do we learn from them? Because sometimes I think like we need to hire more people, and we need to sort of bring people in. And the larger question is around what is the expertise that's already in schools, and how do we learn and elevate those with opportunities for more leadership at the same time of bringing more folks in. I think, the Healing Center framework, honestly, Liz, it took us a lot of time to build and construct because we wanted to get it right. And I think what we have to continue to do is operationalize it by supporting teachers and training teachers, because sometimes our own way of seeing the world might actually keep us away from like interacting and supporting young people when we don't know, like, what does this sort of, the way a behavior may show up in class is really related to something that's very deep. And then how do we sort of give people the right ways to sort of build relationship and foster an opportunity for young people to open up more and us to address those. And I think a part of what we heard from young people throughout the pandemic is one way of solving it is to provide more opportunities for youth. And so what might more job opportunities look for kids who've been in economic situations that have been exacerbated by the pandemic, I think is also another piece of that. And then finally, there are some community-based organizations that the district is contracting with right now. And so, there is more supports are being driven into schools right now. And I think that is going to take some of the pressure off adults who are trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah, and I would just add, Liz, that, one is investments in teacher training, because I think what's teachers is, they want to be in control, right? They have to be. I always tell parents, we cannot, we wouldn't survive without teachers. The fact that they can have 20 plus children in a classroom when we can barely handle our 2 or 3 children, and when their children are going through trauma, when they're acting out, there's a sense of helplessness, right? There's a sense of being overwhelmed. So number one, training our teachers, giving them the tools as they observe those behaviors. And then second, having structures in the schools that, that includes counselors and social workers and our nurses. And frankly, those are areas that we know that we need to invest more in. As Maurice said, we're very blessed that we have community organizations that help supplement, and then we need more of that. And so I think those are just investments, and that's us, CPS, that's the city, that's the county and the state, right? This has to be a community effort to invest in these services because they're needed more than ever.
So both of you, I'm gonna pull this one from the chat because both of you mentioned, supports for teachers, for our young people. So I want to double click here. Someone just put this in the Q&A a few minutes ago, and I was reading the question verbatim. It says, "I know there are strong plans to champion equity with respect to race, social emotional supports, and geographic location, but is there a plan to address the intersection between disability and race/SES when looking at issues with access to inclusive classrooms, appropriate support services, and assistive technology?"
Yeah, we just, my interpretation of this is around special education. And so over the last 6 months or so, we've been really taking a critical lens into how are we structured, what are the supports needed so we can streamline those processes to do what you are describing. Like, how do you make sure assistive technology gets to the right student at the right time? And so we've been working with behind the scenes. Pedro has been looking at plans and giving us ideas on way to sort of restructure and recenter some things. Because what we are finding is there is a deep intersectionality. Like, there's even an assumption that all north side schools have one thing and all south and west sides have this. And what we found is when we use opportunity indexing and equity indexing, we find pockets of disparity that are located in areas that one might not think they would be located. So, you've probably heard Pedro say data a few times on the conversation. And one of the questions that he will ask is, what does the data show us in order to make some decisions that are impactful to different student groups? So, without sort of letting the tail wag the dog, as someone would say, but like, we are working on all of that so that it's more timely in terms of getting resources into the hands of young people.
Yeah, and Liz, I would say this, we invest quite a bit in our diverse learners, and we should, right? And frankly, they deserve more. One of the things that we really want to look at is how do we make sure we look at our service delivery? And so, for example, asking the question, how many, what is the amount of time that our children are accessing the core content, right? And, that there's a true inclusion program across our district, that we use best practices, right? Like co-teach models, for example. One of the things that I love in my former district, we found that project-based learning was wonderful for our special needs children. We created Montessori programs where they were integrated with our general children at the youngest ages. But even at the secondary level, when you brought in project-based learning, it was amazing how I saw these students shine. And so there's best practices, with that, as well as, for example, how you deal with things like dyslexia, right? We have a large number of children, across the country that struggle with dyslexia. And so having strong literacy practices at the youngest grades so that we can really, address those issues, early. And children don't get old, so they have the skills to adapt. So again, those are things, as Maurice has said, we are looking at everything we're doing, and we want to make sure we align resources, we look at data, but I've always said this: we have a commitment. We have a commitment to really improve our services because there's a lot of struggle still with our diverse learners.
I want to pivot, and this question actually came in prior, but I think it's really important that we touch on this. And the question is about our students who are in Chicago public schools who are experiencing homelessness, and particularly some of our African-American students. Research has shown that about 26% of Black students in CPS will experience homelessness during their school age years, which I remember when that statistic came out, I was just like mind blown by that. But it's a rate obviously at several times that of some of their peers. And so the question really is, how can CPS support students who are facing such barriers to engaging in school? What is being done, what can be done, and then are we taking a holistic view as we think about those numbers, which actually I believe came out of the Inclusive Economies Lab over at the University of Chicago.
So one of the things, we started to do a housing navigator pilot because once again, how do you get individual student support, right? And how do you make sure that when when a person becomes unhoused, where is the place to get information to get housing or supports, right? And so through the Children's First Fund, we've done that housing navigator pilot, which I think is another piece. And, we have Chicago Connected to assist with technology access. And we're still learning. And I know, Pedro, you have some ideas about connecting with different municipalities within the city about supporting housing.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, one of the things that I think is key is, and this is where our schools need help, is how do we connect our children to services? Because we know that here in our city, we do have multiple organizations, including the city agencies, that have these services for children and families. And many times the issue is the connection. How do we make the connection to the children who need it the most? And so I think that's something, again, as a city, as a community, we have to work towards. I mean, there's organizations like Communities in Schools and other organizations that try to make those connections. I think one of the commitments that we have to make is that to make it easier is just to be easier to work with. Many times, and the pandemic frankly hasn't helped, but many times, we're not as easy to work with, especially when organizations are trying to connect services to families. And that's where frankly, social workers, case managers, I mean, those resources very, very much help. So I think, first of all, we got to leverage what we have, right? And really make sure we know that, what resources exist and connect those resources to those children, especially children who, and I'm pretty sure, Liz, you saw this in your former high school, and I know you did too, Maurice. I mean, especially as they get to high school age, you will see children going from one home to another. I saw that, consistently. And what I loved was when teachers knew that, they always made sure that they were looking out for those children. So I would say that's the other thing is we have some amazing caring, adults in our schools. And so once they know that these children have those kind of challenges, it's also making sure that we can help them to provide those services to those children.
Is there so this question really has to do with really piggybacking off what you mentioned, Pedro, about just partnerships. And the question really is, how do community organizations and partnerships fit into the mission and vision of the district? And the person wrote, there are a lot of barriers for these organizations to even get permissions to enter into the school. Is there a way to create a clear pathway for volunteers, vendors, and other community supports while recognizing the complexities of having people interacting with our young people?
I'll tell you, it's Maurice and I kind of do this because first of all, we cannot do this work without partners. This work is too big. Education, of course, is our core mission, but the other services that are needed because of the just frankly because the challenges that our families deal with, we need help. We need help across, whether it's again mental health, whether it's housing, employment services. I've had a conversation with the chancellor of the community colleges. How do we upgrade the skills of our parents? Because that has a direct impact on our children. So many of our children can't even think about college because they're thinking about, oh my God, we're going to get evicted. We can't pay these bills. How do I help my family? Right? That's how we think, as children, how do we help our parents? And so I think one of the things that we just have to figure out is how do we make it easier for organizations to work with us? And it is bureaucratic. Unfortunately, we do have, our legal team, they feel like they're doing the right things to protect us. But I think in that process, we also make it incredibly difficult for people to work with us. I mean, even complaints from healthcare agencies who want to provide more vaccines in our schools, and they'll tell me it's not that easy to work with you guys. And so I just think it's something, that I know Maurice and I, it's just something we got to do. We got to figure it out. There's no excuse about it. But like you said, Liz, there's always this balance of how do you protect our children, right? Because we can't just allow anybody to come in. This is a former principal, but there has to be a balance there. There has to be a balance of how we do this in a common sense way.
Yeah, I think Pedro acknowledging we're not easy to work with is a good thing. And we have to we've taken the more conservative approach to access, which is the unintended consequence is it's harder for people to get in. And so, Jay Dean Chow, who's over safety and security, has already started, she's streamlined the background check process to make it easier, right? And then we're also finding with some community-based organizations, there are issues around insurance and tax codes and numbers. There's so much. And so, Pedro has charged us with, sort of like this scenario-based way of when you have this type of organization, what do you do? And to make those pathways more seamless and streamlined so that it doesn't take a very long time to become a part of the district solution to supporting young people. And we are we are figuring that out, like he said.
This next question actually came from one of our teachers. It was live in the chat a few minutes ago, and it says, understanding that the history of the Chicago Teachers Union and Chicago Public Schools has been contentious even before the official inception of the Teachers Union. What do you think you can do to break the culture and institutionalization of the adversarial relations between the two? It's so important that they're able to work together.
So I'll tell you, Jesse Sharkey and I, we've been in active conversations, almost since I started. In fact, Maurice and I had dinner with the CTU leadership. I think it was in my first week, Maurice, right? We met with them. And so I think it starts first by, having honest conversations. And we had this conversation that, there's some trust issues that go back well beyond a decade. And so we called that out. And so, for example, Jesse and I have committed, that we're going to, especially, after this work stoppage, that we're going to find a way to move forward, that we're going to find a way to work together. I believe, I respect the union that, again, their role is to protect its members, to protect, frankly, unions have made our country better overall. I mean, it's the reason why, working conditions are so much better than they were, decades ago, is because of unions. And we should recognize that. The challenge is, how do we make sure that there is on both sides a trust level to be able to find solutions that don't create so much drama and so much challenges for our families. And so that's a challenge that, that I will put to myself and to our team. And frankly, I'll put to our partners, right? We have to find ways to solve solutions without holding our families hostage. And that's something that, again, we all have to own. It isn't one-sided. We all have to own that. My commitment is that, I'm going to make sure that, that we listen, and that when we hear concerns that employees have, that we really act timely. And all I ask again is, let's make sure we do that without, frankly, creating, situations that could harm our children, because that's the unintended consequence. It's like when two parents are in a fight and they're in a divorce. Who really suffers at the end? It's the children, right? That are caught in the middle because it's their parents. They can't separate them. They both, and so I hate, and it's probably not a great analogy. Probably Maurice has a better analogy, but that's the best I can come up with.
No, I say this thing to myself right now. I said, teachers are human beings who are citizens who live in the city of Chicago, who are my colleagues and who are members of a union. And so acknowledging the complexity of all that is very, very important. And I think, Pedro, you said this, and I'll just kind of throw this out there right now of like, how do we do more focus group listening in some ways? Like, how do we situate ourselves to narrow groups to talk and listen? And then, what are the common things? What are the things we need to pay attention to now and later? I think that sort of deconstructing these big conglomerates, institutions, and, all of that, and really get into what are people saying on the ground? Like, are teachers saying different things across race and gender and zip code? Like, how do we start to, it's a big undertaking, but I think it's worth it, because in the same way that we said in the framework, right, different people are situated differently. We got to understand that. And I think the only way to do it is to create a process to do it.
Two other questions I want to raise. I want to dig into option schools and then into the vaccination. A question just came in, and it was really also around option schools. How are we thinking about some of our most vulnerable students in these settings? Due to the contracts that the option schools set up, there could be barriers to supports that they can receive from the district. And the question is, how do we ensure that all of our students receive the support they need, especially those that are most vulnerable?
Go ahead, Maurice.
Yeah,
looking at this quite a bit.
Yeah, so I'm sure people saw the article in the Sun-Times where it said CPS is quietly making adjustments to this, right? And we didn't sort of make a big acknowledgement that we are paying attention to those structures and how students end up in option schools, and the ways in which, we've tweaked a lot of our internal policies around a lot. I won't dig into it right now, but one of the things is, are students getting what they get in neighborhood schools? And if the answer is no, what does that mean for our work? And I think we also got to do a better job with making sure that that the neighborhood school is the place for young people to get what they need. And to Pedro's at the beginning of this, like talking about offerings at schools and supports being in those schools, you know, if we don't ensure that the neighborhood school is the core foundation for students being successful, we got to do better. We got some healing and some changes to make. And I think opportunity is missing from that. And that is what we want to solve for, I think, in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to have a strategy both for the children right now that this is a safety net for them, and we have to recognize it's an important safety net for them.
Yes.
But also work on the strategies around how do we prevent children from getting into that situation, right? To where they're getting behind in credits, where they're getting behind, they're not on track. I mean, I love our metrics. I mean, these go back to, you know, when I first was here developing our freshman on track metric, which was always very accurate. But how do we make sure we provide those supports across our high schools? Because you know, and you both know this as former principals, by the end of freshman year, you know whether children, you know, are going to drop out. I mean, you have a sense immediately. And so these are challenges that, you know, that we gotten better with. I mean, our data shows it. And I'm glad that we have the option schools as safety nets. I do, you know, I have a lot of confidence in the team that we're going to make sure that we can have consistency and quality. So that's always an area. But again, I think the biggest investment we have to continue to make is on the prevention side. We just got to make sure they stay on our comprehensive schools, as Maurice said, just through access of high quality programming.
So I'll ask this last question, and I want to just give you opportunity to each of you to close out with our audience. This last question is really on the COVID vaccination. And so it comes from one of our teachers, and it says, how do we respect families' choice and be sensitive to hesitancy while making our schools and communities safer? The vaccination rates amongst our children are low. Since COVID is going to be here for the foreseeable future, how can we make sure that Black and Brown families are getting themselves and their children vaccinated so that we can actually keep students in school? And the person asked that both of you respond.
Go ahead, Maurice.
Yeah. So vaccination hesitancy is a real thing. And so sometimes when folks have seen lower vaccination rates in communities, a part of the assumption, which I think is partly accurate, is that CPS could do a better job with getting vaccines to certain communities. And at the same time, certain communities are saying, I don't trust the science and the government behind the science. And, you know, there's a lot of history of treating Black and Brown people badly with vaccinations and things, right? So we know that that is a real thing. What we are doing right now is saying, okay, if we know vaccination rates are lower in some communities, how do we make sure that there is more available testing now that we have more concrete data? Now that we're getting data about student vaccinations with, you know, into our own data systems here in CPS. So the strategy will have to be diverse, ensuring that, you know, we've bought a lot of masks, we have a lot of tests. There's, you know, I don't know if we've made the announcement, but there are a lot of tests here, so we won't be absent of tests. But I think I still want to continue to push families to get vaccinated. I don't know any way around that. You know, I know some people who thought that they would never get it, who've gotten it. And I think, you know, the vaccine is not meant to be perfect. It's meant to be the best mitigation strategy to keep people safe. And so what we find is people who are vaccinated have less symptoms, less hospitalization, and less death. And I think I want to keep pushing that. And at the same time, giving schools, you know, we are connecting with aldermen more and sort of building out how we solve that. But I think to the point, it's not going away and we got to stick with it.
Yeah, and I would just add, you know, there's definitely some areas to learn from. So for example, in Hanson Park, there, you know, the organizations there that, you know, in the health space actually, you know, put together outreach programs where they went to families' homes and they have, you know, they really saw huge success in getting more families getting vaccinated. So there's no shortcut to this. I think it's just being personal with families. And I think it's all of us, right? It's our teachers, it's our nurses, it's community agencies. It's us actually talking to, I mean, all of us, we all know this, right? We have family members who are unvaccinated. And, I have a family member who's unvaccinated, right? And it's how do we have these conversations? And it's tough because for some it is political, for some it's a history, there's some history to it. I think, we're going to continue to have struggles with COVID until we have higher vaccination rates. And I think we have to just be honest about it. So if we want to avoid some of the drama that we've had recently, well, guess what? We're always going to be at risk, not because of anything else that's going on. And by the way, this is anywhere in the country, because there is a lot of things going on all over the country. We have to just find a way to connect with families to be able to help them get vaccinated. And it's more about information. We've never had issues with supplies of vaccines. I've never had any, we have 24 school-based clinics. We have over 100 mobile events that we do every 2 months. We've never had an issue of running out of supply, never.
And I think we can do it. I do. And one of the things I'll give a nod to Stacey Davis Gates. One day we were having a conversation and she highlighted one of the clerks who works in schools. I'm not sure if it was her son's school or somebody's school, but she says, this clerk is amazing. Find out about her, right? And so it reminds us that the people who are in front of kids have the best strategy. And Pedro said it earlier, we got to learn which schools did it well and how do we start to collect that information and use it as a part of the larger district strategy.
Well, thank you to you both just for taking time to be here today. I know there are many other things going on in your worlds, and so just glad that you could be here with us to share your thoughts and ideas as we navigate this together, as we navigate, creating a better, more equitable space for our young people. Maurice, I'll give you a last word, and then Pedro, if you wouldn't mind just closing us on out for the final word.
Yeah. I am always optimistic about the future for the city of Chicago and Chicago public schools. I think being Black, gay, queer, there is no other way but to be optimistic. I can't stay in pain or anger a very long time because it doesn't help us to solve big problems. And so I think my last word before Pedro is whenever you feel like you want to have a hand in the solution, please put your hand, in the stack of hands. And also when there are concerns, raise them up. Pedro listens a lot. I'll give you that nod. And is always asking for different ways to solve things. And so I think there's centering possibility here for all students across the city. And so just welcoming, past your first 100 days and Chicago Beyond as partners, I think if we can continue to bring more folks to the center of the work, we can do great work together.
No, absolutely, Maurice. And I'll just say this, in the next 2 to 3 months, we're going to be sharing with you just some big ideas, some big plans, everything from investing in preschool to investing in multiple programs, investing in our comprehensive high schools, creating more resources for our schools to serve our families, making key investments in areas, whether it's our diverse learners or English language learners. And what I suggest is, again, know that you have a seat at the table. Know that you're part of this, because I only know how to do this work one way. And in terms of getting success, is that we have to have ownership. And this is our city. This is our community. I've grown up here. I went to school here. I know, when I look at our children, again, regardless of what school they're from, I see myself in them and they see themselves in me. And so we want to make sure that whatever we're doing, we are doing it together. And so that's my commitment. I am, like Maurice, I am optimistic. Why? Because this is our city and it is an awesome city. So thank you again, Liz, for your leadership, and thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thanks to you both for your tireless work. And for our audience, if you want to learn more about Chicago Beyond, please visit us at chicagobeyond.org. Have a wonderful rest of the afternoon, you too. See you soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.